Sorry, I'm just gonna start that so we can get that taken care of. But yeah, so I'm joined with me today with Clay McLeod Chapman. He is the author of The Remaking. Woo! Can you tell? I don't know if it'll let me. There we go. Woo! Thank you. Which is one of our summer scares books for 2022. And I have to say I enjoyed this a lot. It was fun. I wasn't as scared as I thought I would be, but I did think it was great. So we're gonna start out with just the real basic question. How did you get involved in horror?
Oh, well, I am a fan. I feel like there was that one babysitter who probably exposed me to horror, at a too early of an age. I think I probably, I do remember Saturday the 14th, which is not a terrifying movie. It's not, it's one of these horror comedies from the early 80s. But I remember watching it on TV, and I didn't have any of the kind of vernacular or understanding of what makes a good horror movie. And upon further reflection, Saturday the 14th might not have been a great movie, but it was one of my first horror movies. And it kind of made me, I was converted from that moment on. So I blame Saturday the 14th, starring Richard Benjamin, I think. That's probably the only actor I can pull out of my head. I haven't seen it in ages.
Well, that's great. I can't say that I was only a recent convert. I have not been a fan of horror for a very long time. In college, I was forced to read Joe Hill's Heart-Shaped Box,
Great
and
book.
good book, wonderful book. And that opened the door to me of like possibilities that I could handle some horror. But it wasn't until Paul Tremblay's A Head Full of Ghosts that I fell in love. And then when Becky from Reader's Advisory and the Horror Writers Association, she was blogging about this a year or two ago, and I fell in love with summer scares, and I have been convinced by some of my coworkers that we should run this every year, and we've been gracious enough to get funding from our friends of the library in order to run this. So I'm very excited to have you here, and I'm very excited that we get to do this.
Yeah,
because it's now one of my favorite genres. So I
that's
love
great.
it.
Yeah, well, once a fan, always a fan. Like, I feel like whatever your gateway is, into the genre, I think this is what I honestly believe about horror kind of in general, whether it's film or literature. It's a very expansive umbrella. There's a lot out there, and you might not be scared by everything within it, but I think that there are so many niches and so many various threads and kind of paths in which to take that you can kind of find your own personal this is the kind of horror that I like, and this is the kind of horror that you like. And it's not exclusive, it's inclusive. Like it feels very, very much like for everybody. It's for the people. Horror is for the people.
Right. Well, and I agree. Like, again, a lot of genres cross all age groups and everything like that. But I think late in the last couple of years, horror, especially for younger readers, has definitely upticked. And it's not just R.L. Stine and Goosebumps anymore. Like, we're getting a whole lot more out there, and it's very exciting to do that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you're making me want to do a little plug. I am just now reading The Clackety, which comes out later on this summer. This is a middle grade book by Laura Senft, and it is amazing. It's very spooky. So if you have any young readers out there, I would definitely wholeheartedly recommend The Clackety.
Well, hopefully our other librarian, Carrie, is on with us, and she's the one that orders for that area. So is it on order? Do we have it? Like,
I think so. My carts for all of the months are just stacked way out into the future. So
hopefully soon. So yes, I'll add it to my list and we'll see what happens. Speaking of various genres, what is your type of horror? What's your go-to? Like, are you the gore? Are you the body dysmorphia? Are you the aliens,
all
the
of it,
monsters?
all of it. Why choose? Like I think that there's that, like I do kind of think of it as food. Sometimes you want Thai, sometimes you want a burger, sometimes you want pizza, Chinese, sushi. Like I find like the very refined French cuisine, or the kind of like gastro pub. Like I don't know, like there's so much. And a lot of it depends on mood. A lot of it depends on kind of the time in which you get to it. I don't know. Like it's definitely one of those things where, for me, I love it all. I love it all. If I had to pick one, I couldn't do it. Like if you put a gun to my head, like I still wouldn't be able to. I like ghost stories, I like haunted house stories, but I like slasher stories, and I like haunted boat stories, and I mean, maybe I should say haunted stuff. I'll take the haunted stuff, the ghosts,
Okay.
the ghosts. But that's kind of discrediting 99.9% of the other stuff out there. And I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know if I'm ready to commit. I love it all. Do I love the gore as much as the ghost stories? Maybe not, but sometimes a good slasher, like I think it just depends,
Did you, speaking of gore, did you read Haley Piper's Queen of Teeth?
Yes, I did.
I loved the first 2/3 of that, and then when it all went to chaos at the end, I was like, I have to read this from over here and hold it like and just kind of like glance and be like, but like I think that was the first time in a while where I was reading a horror book and I was just like, okay, she's got me and she's got me good.
I loved it. I couldn't walk straight after reading that book for probably like 3 days. It was Haley.
Yeah, body dysmorphia to the extreme. Like, my God, she did it. It was great.
It's true.
But yeah, that would be, I think that's one of my top ones that I have to actually stay away from. Like, I can do it, but in small doses. I'm a haunted girl too. It's like, I'll give me a spooky house and a weird doll, and I'll be fine. But anything else, the gore gets to me too much sometimes. So we're gonna jump into your book here, the Remaking, which is about a tragic story that happens in the 1930s, and it just keeps coming back, and people keep bringing it back as it turns into an urban legend, and they want it to just not disappear, but that the town wants it to disappear, but the world as a whole won't let them forget it. What is your favorite urban legend?
Oh, wow. I mean, I have strong inclinations to say Bloody Mary, just because that's the kind of classic standby. But the Hook Man, like I love the story of the Hook,
Car door
the
Hook
young
Man.
couple. Yeah. Oh my God, that one's amazing.
I think that was the first one I ever heard.
I do have vivid memories of encountering scary stories to tell in the dark as a younger reader. And I mean, was it Alvin Schwartz and Stephen Gamble? I mean, Stephen Gamble's illustrations were phenomenal. But thinking of Alvin Schwartz just kind of calling together all of these urban legends and these kind of ghost stories, like I mean, is anything gonna trump Bloody Mary? Probably not. What I love about Bloody Mary is the kind of like the immersive kind of engaging quality to it, that it is a ghost story. It serves as its own kind of like self-contained yarn. But from there, it's how you as the listener, the reader, the audience member, whatever you consider yourself to be within this story, like you choose to engage. Like you then hear the story and then you go to the mirror in the bathroom and then you do it. And I think in like true Candyman fashion, like there is something to be said about a story that brings you into the fold and then compels you, challenges you to participate. And I remember at those slumber parties when I was younger, being like, am I going to do this? Am I going to do this? And the first three, you're like, and we're going to do it. I'm going to say it, like Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. And then you get halfway through, or like 2/3, 3/4 of the way through, and you're like, should I be doing this? Is this like, am I really gonna like, my hubris here is too, I don't know if I'm gonna make it. So I don't know. I just love that. I love that there's an urban legend that compels you to participate and then challenges you to what, to like, are you brave enough to do it? I love that. That's amazing.
So did you ever get through all of the Bloody Marys?
Never. I'm still
Never.
Here. I'm alive. Like,
Right.
I'm
That's
like,
true. That's true.
Had I done it, there would be no remaking. There would be nothing. This would be a very one-sided conversation.
I think one of the most fascinating parts about your book, and one that I really enjoyed, is the fact that the urban legend continued, but it is based on a true story. And I think that's a really fascinating thing, because if you look into like the heart of a lot of these urban legends, there is a true story, whether or not the insanity that has become the urban legend is really there. But there was that one dad that went crazy and tried to put razor blades in his son's apples because whatever, that happened. I mean, he wasn't the cause of the razor blade apple story. He just tried to use that as justification. But that exists. There were crazy people that were stealing babies from doctors in the 50s and 60s and selling them off to other families. Like, that's been going on forever. And so that whole idea of changelings and whatnot, like, that all exists for a reason. And I think that was what I really enjoyed about your book, is that there is the truth to the story, whether or not they were witches, whether or not they were actually harming the townsfolk or helping the townsfolk. I think having it come as a true story that evolved really stuck with me, and I think was really great, because that is what happens with urban legends.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, because for me, the kind of foundation to the story is this kind of question of who has the right to tell our stories. Like, who has the privilege to tell our stories? Like, who are our storytellers, and are they necessarily the right people in which to tell those stories, our stories, the stories that are not their own? Like, I think I was thinking a lot about appropriation, and thinking a lot about how, a ghost story, or an urban legend, it has its basis in fact. It has its roots in history. And I feel like we're at a time right now where it's good for us to kind of ask these questions of our filmmakers, our storytellers, our writers, because it begs one to kind of be a little bit analytical and kind of say, like, am I the right person to tell this story? Should I be telling this story? And I include myself in that. Like, I wanted the process of this novel, as both the kind of writer of it and you as the reader of it, to kind of like engage with that that kind of conversation. But yes, at the basis of the remaking, there is this true story, this event that happened at the turn of a century ago, where I changed the name from Pilot's Knob to Pilot's Creek and changed the location from Kentucky to Virginia. But if you Google the Little Witch Girl of Pilot's Knob, Kentucky, you will find an urban legend that exists that kind of skews into true crime, where there was a mother and a daughter who, were believed to be witches within their their small town, and they were burned at the stake. And the mother's grave, they buried mom somewhere in the woods. Nobody knows where she's buried, but they were so terrified of this young girl and what she might do to them that they actually true story, they buried her in a steel reinforced coffin in consecrated ground, filling up 6 feet of concrete over her grave, pouring gravel over the concrete, and then wrapping the entire tomb in crosses, hundreds of interconnecting crosses. And that, you can go to the Pilot's Knob Cemetery right now, and you can see this grave of this young woman. And from there, the urban legend spins out, and they say that if you go visit this grave at midnight, you can see the ghost of the little witch girl kind of wandering along, and she'll ask you to take her hand, but you don't do it because she'll pull you under the ground and drag you into her grave. And if you go to like YouTube right now, there are all these little mini Blair Witch videos that people have created with their cell phones, kind of going to the grave, like waiting for her. And I just found that really astounding, like this kind of, in this way that like you take something from history and it just spins out and it spins out and it spins out. And I can't help but think like, this poor woman and her mother, like if they only knew like how far the ripple effect of their story kind of goes, years later, 100 years later, over 100 years later, and people are still talking about them now, but they're not talking about them. They're kind of talking about this version of them or this rendition of them. And I don't know, like that kind of question of like, is this story even mine anymore? Is it like, is this me that you're talking about? Like, it just, I think it kind of begs one to ask, like, what is the value of a ghost story or the value of a film or a novel when if it has its roots in history, like, is it the story of this child, or is it some version of it, or some kind of like exploited kind of like an exploitation rendition of the truth?
That jumping back to the part where you were talking about, who has the right to tell these stories. I did find it really interesting because in one part of your book, when Amber is at the convention and they're talking about the final girls and the scream queens, and she's talking about how she's not one of them, and she goes on a mini rant in her head about these white men who think that they have the right to throw these half-naked women onto the screen for their own pleasure and purpose. And I was like, is he making fun of himself at this part? Because like he's doing the exact same thing technically with this book. I mean, sure, Amber isn't naked really ever in the book, but like you are having a female main character who is being tortured psychologically by a ghost or her own mental illness or whatever. And so I just was that like a self nod, like, yes, I know.
Yeah, I mean, I can't be left off the hook here. Like I'm a part of this process, and there's no writing about this without kind of, it wasn't even so much a wink as much as it was like, I don't know, shining the light on me and being like, my hands are bloody here too. Like I'm a part of this as well. Excuse me, I have something caught in my throat, so I feel like Jessica is cursing me as we speak because
We're talking too much about her.
she's not pleased. But no, yeah, it was definitely, I wanted to implicate myself within the process of writing this. So if there's ever a sequel to the Remaking 2 would be like, and then a writer came around and like wrote a book about it, and then he was cursed, and you know, and then there was a virtual reality game and the video game and no, we'll see.
I mean, I think a video game of urban legends would be great. I'm sure there's some out there, but
God, that would be amazing. I am not a video game player, so I feel like I'm the wrong person to ask. But if there isn't, so hopefully someone watching out there right now is like, inspiration has just hit.
well, I know that there have been some, especially with a lot of like the Japanese. I don't know if they're, do you technically call them urban legends still, because they're based on the ghosts of like their, I'm not sure what that would be called, if they would technically be called urban legends, but I know that there is at least one or two dealing with like the smiling woman who, she asks if you want to see her smile or something like that, and you tell her no thanks, then when if you say yeah sure or whatever, or tell her to smile, like her whole jaw just unhinges and eats you. I don't know, I've seen it played, so I know that it's there.
Amazing.
But I don't know. But I would love to. I'd love to try something. I just don't know if I would be brave enough to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
It does make me think of your whole book made me think of the podcast, Just a Story. I don't know if you heard of it. Unfortunately, like they kind of just disappeared in 2018. Like they had been going for quite a few years, and some personal things, but they did a fantastic job of like taking an urban legend and going to the root of what started it. And so I think that's a lot of why I was really fascinated to buy your book, was because it was, digging to the heart of the story. And I love being able to help people tell their stories. So this was just a fantastic book for me. Again, it wasn't like a scary book to me. Like there were creepy parts to it, but it wasn't like a full horror, I guess you could say. Like the eerie feeling is there, but it doesn't stay with you or whatever. I was just intrigued throughout it. I was just fascinated with it. And so that was my focus, was just like, all right, I want to know more. Like, tell me more.
Yay.
Speaking of other books that you've written, you also did Whisper Down the Lane, right?
Yes.
That came out, was that last year? 2 years ago?
It came out last year. The paperback just came out in April. So yeah, April 20, gosh, time has lost its meaning anymore. April 2021. That's when it came out.
Yeah. So I remember reading that, and it was great because I was also reading We Believe the Children at the same time. And so when I got to your book and I was reading it, and I was just like, wait, this is that book. And so I went to your notes in the back, and you're like, yes, and this is taken from this book. And I was like, oh my God, I'm reading them together, and this is perfect. But yeah. I mean, if we're going to talk about a story that creates urban legends, like that right there is another one, with the whole satanic panic and just the broken hypnosis and forced memories and all of that. Like, if we're talking about urban legends, that's the whole period started a bunch of urban legends that are just great.
Yeah. I mean, it was, I grew up during that era, and I remember very vividly being kind of warned of kind of the van with no windows, or the, you know, the stranger danger. And it wasn't even so much that it was like a terrifying time as much as it was this kind of low grade fever. Like you were always kind of aware of a certain kind of neighborhood paranoia that was just kind of pervasive. It was there when you went out. And yet we as children were kind of allowed to like run rampantly through the streets. It was this weird kind of cognitive dissonance where they were like, you know, all right, kids, like you're free to go play in the neighborhood, but watch out for the man who's gonna like offer you a candy bar and like, you know, pull you into the back of his station wagon. And it was just kind of like they were trying to scare common sense into you, I guess. And like the teaching lesson was basically like, you know, we're gonna spin this yarn, this ghost story, or this kind of urban legend of like the devil worshiping pedophile in the neighborhood who's just kind of like patrolling, like wandering around and looking for kids to like kidnap. And this is in the back of our minds as we're riding our bikes through the neighborhood. And we're just like, you know, I just found that astounding that like, you know, and now as a parent, I I don't spin the same yarn, but there is this notion of like, oh my God, like every day I say goodbye to my kids and send them off to school. There's this constant dread of like, you know, what's going to happen today? Like, you know, it's almost like I'm imagining a horror movie in my head where I'm casting my own children as the lead, like the kind of the victims of this thing. And it's just like, you know, like, is it going to be this or is it going to be that? You know, is it going to be COVID? Is it going to be a school shooting? Is it going to be a kidnapping? Is it going to be, and like that list is just so long of parental terrors that it's, I don't know, it's horrifying. So Whisper Down the Lane was a kind of answer to both the fear that I felt as a child being let loose in the world, and then the fear as a parent who's kind of actively letting go of my little lambs and, you know, putting them into the scary world we live in.
I as a parent myself, I have that exact same feeling every day. So I know where you're coming from.
Yeah.
And I get that. Going back to the satanic panic and whatnot, like I remember in the early 90s when I would go trick-or-treating, like we knew not to go to the one house because that was where the witch lived. Like, you know, nobody ever knew anything. I think she was a single woman who lived by herself and had fun as a single woman, and that just wasn't heard of at that time. But also, I mean, we're in Wisconsin, so we're home of Gary Gygax and the start of D&D, and you know, so like that was a big thing because, you know, if you play D&D, you open up your portals to hell and Satan's going to come through them.
But isn't that amazing that like I feel like the more things change, the more they stay the same, where like there are the satanic panic never really left as much as it kind of like sublimated itself into these kind of smaller pockets. And you know, it almost became more of a kind of grassroots effort that every so often it kind of bubbles up into like something like Pizzagate or Little Nas X, and like, you know, but at the same time, I love the idea that like there is a localized urban legend for every neighborhood, for every, you know, every town has that witch who lives at the end of the lane, or there is that, you know, don't go into that house at midnight and, you know, knock 3 times on the door, or, you know, whatever it may be. And it's, I don't know, like I find something very kind of compelling and beautiful about that, because that's handmade storytelling. That's the oral tradition kind of coming out, because it spreads, it gets passed along to every other neighborhood kid. I don't know, like that to me is kind of fundamental storytelling. And I you know, I remember it. I remember partaking in it, bearing witness to it. and those stories, they still resonate. Like they're still like, you've grown up, but you still remember that witch who lived in a neighborhood. And, just think of like all the other kids from your neighborhood who spread the story even further. And like, maybe that story is still going on even now. Like it's that,
Well, I
like,
mean,
that,
last time we drove through, I remember turning to my husband and going, "That's the witch's house. Like the house is still there. She doesn't live there anymore." But I'm like, that was the witch's house, and
yeah.
I'm like, I don't live in that town anymore. I haven't lived in that town since I was in second grade, but I know that house. And if I tell people about my childhood, I'm like, oh, and that's the witch's house.
Yeah.
It,
The story remains. The story
it does.
persists. It lasts beyond us. That's the amazing thing.
Well, and my coworker Carrie, she definitely knows about this because she was raised in Appalachia, and so she's been doing oral storytelling since she was born. Like that whole family did it.
But I also got a second punch there too, because my family was we are the satanic panic family. Very, very church going, the devil is going to get you family. So we had that going too.
All inclusive, everything.
It's why there's some real authenticity. I don't know if you've ever listened to the podcast Old Gods of Appalachia.
No.
It is fantastic. It's Appalachian rural storytelling of like the things that live in the mines and ghosts and witches.
I'll totally check that out.
Yeah, you definitely should. I can speak to its authenticity. It is Appalachian.
I was recently talking to someone about the urban legend, the Appalachian urban legend, Talipo, the legend of Talipo.
I love Talipo.
It's so fun. I like that story. Kind of that would be top 3, top 5 urban legends. So
well, and even
my Talipo.
And even with that one, that urban legend has so many different endings. Like sometimes the dogs survive, sometimes they don't, sometimes the man is killed, sometimes he lives on and tells the scary tale of don't ever steal the creature's tail, and that's another great thing about urban legends, is that they continue to evolve every time they're told.
Very much so.
Excuse me. Speaking of other books, so you're coming out in September, right? With Ghost Eaters.
Ghost Eaters, yeah.
Which I have a digital arc of, and I am very excited to read it. Can you give us a little more about Ghost Eaters?
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. It's gonna be a doozy. It's basically what if there was a haunted drug where you pop a pill and you can see the dead, you can see ghosts. And the idea is, we focus on a group of friends, and they have uncovered this drug, Ghost, and they start to take it. And, one quickly realizes that, like, once you start seeing the dead, once you start seeing ghosts can see you. They're aware of the fact that they are being seen, and they are not necessarily as happy about all of that attention, and they react kind of in kind. And it was a way for me to kind of talk about addiction, talk about grief, talk about losing friends, but doing it in this kind of hallucinatory, dreamlike, really spooky kind of I'm from the South, I'm from Virginia, and it allowed me an opportunity to kind of speak a little bit more to my kind of personal obsession with growing up in Virginia, and how you basically walk down the street and it's haunted, like everything is haunted. And it's a fun kind of floodgate to open. So yeah, I think Ghost Eaters is going to be a lot of fun.
just realized that I have an arc of that too.
Hey,
I
there
wasn't
you
putting
go.
the title and the plot, and we start talking about the plot. I'm like, wait a minute.
Wait a minute, I've heard about that one.
I think I was very excited about your description because there was a graphic novel that came out a couple of years ago, where it was along similar veins, but instead of a drug, you snorted cremains.
Wait, was it Cullen Bunn's comic? With Bone Parish?
Yes,
Yes. Yeah.
which is fantastic. I loved it so much. I was trying to find the title and I couldn't think of it, but that graphic novel is fascinating because, like, you can sniff some grandma and go visit her for a while, or maybe we can get some famous guitar player and snort his cremains, and then we can have his skills for the hour or two that this lasts. And
Totally.
so when I saw the description for your book, I was just like, oh my god, yes, let's do this again. I got this.
Yeah. No, Bone Parish is great and Cullen's great. So, I will happily take the comp.
So obviously you're not done writing yet. So hope not. What other types of horror, what other types of things are interesting to you that you maybe want to turn into a book later on?
That's a good question. At this point, I have like a kitty of ideas, like stories that I'm dying to tell, and it's really just a matter of like finding the opportunity to tell it. And I feel like I have so many kind of ghost stories that I really, really want to tell. I have to be a little cagey in terms of what I talk about next, but I'm working on a new book, which I'm really excited about. I'm working on a new creator-owned comic, like a graphic novel, which I'm really, really excited about. Both of those are spooky, kind of horror-ish stuff. Developing a few film and TV things, and like, it's honestly, it's just like you throw 10 balls into the air and you hope you grab like 3, maybe 2, maybe 1, and as long as you grab one, and that leads to the next thing, and then you just throw 10 more in the air. So I've never done a slasher. Do I want to do a slasher? You got me thinking about like all these different kind of niches. I always kind of like, if it's not psychological horror, it's usually supernatural, like ghosts, haunted houses. But I've never done a slasher. But that's like such well-tread territory. I don't have a take on the slasher genre, and I feel like, given Stephen Graham Jones and Grady Hendrix's recent contributions, it's a well-tread, well-explored terrain that you really have to bring something kind of fresh and insightful to it. And but yeah, it would be fun to do like a Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees. I would, if I had something, I would totally do it in a heartbeat. I just like to do haunted things, like haunted drugs, haunted houses, haunted bubble gum, haunted tennis shoes, haunted, like I basically just like have a list of like haunted stuff.
Right. Could I recommend a haunted library?
Haunted library. Has no one ever done a haunted library book?
I mean,
there has to be a haunted
I'm
library
sure
book.
there is, but I'm just saying, Racine is a really good setting for a haunted library. So I'm just, if you need some,
do you have any urban legends? Like, are there any ghosts in the library that you know of? We can create one.
We went ghost hunting at the library and we didn't really get any reaction, but I do have to say that the history section tends to have books fall down all the time, and so I just claim that is our ghost. And I've been claiming that since I've been working here, because I don't know. Well, it started when I started, so maybe I'm just causing it. But like the books keep falling off the shelves, and so it has nothing to do with the fact that they're heavy books and bad bookends. It has everything to do with that's a ghost.
Amazing.
So I've been starting that rumor for a while now. It hasn't stuck, but I'm working on it. I'm sure there are a bunch of ghost stories in the area because I mean we were a very huge industry town in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. So I'm sure there's something, we've had how many sea crashes out on a reef because they couldn't see the reef. And so, there's
Wow.
been a ton of ships that like went ashore. I'm sure there's something here. I just don't know I know the history well. I don't know the urban history well,
Oh, wow.
So
I believe when I read an article about we're having later this summer the Southeast Wisconsin paranormal investigation team come in.
Oh, wow.
And I believe when I read the article about them, they pointed out a couple of bars downtown where they found activity.
yeah, so I know
Not always been bars, you understand?
Amazing.
I do know that the one bar downtown Ivanhoe's is supposed to be haunted. Like one of the rooms upstairs is supposed to be haunted. But that's about the only one I know of right now. So I'm hoping this summer I learn a little bit more. I hope people come in and share some stories with me. So
Ooh,
see
that's
how it
super
is.
cool.
But I'm just saying, if nothing else, Racine is a great place to start one. So if you need some assistance on writing it, just let me know. Get you some details.
Done.
All right. Before we go and see if I can find anybody that has any other questions, let's get your favorite recs. What are your
Ooh.
go-to movies, books, podcasts, music, whatever?
Well, I already mentioned the Clackety, which I have been reading, and so I'm really excited about that. I'm also reading the Blackwater series by Michael McDowell, which was like 6 short novels that kind of clustered together. And that's really good. I'm still kind of early days in that, but I'm really, really loving that. I recently read Daniel Krause's The Ghost That Ate Us, which is all about poltergeist activity in a fast food restaurant. So a haunted fast food chain. That's really good. The Spite House by Johnny Compton. That doesn't come out until next year, but that was a really good one. The Devil Takes You Home by Gabino Iglesias. That's a really good one. The Hollow Kind by Andy Davidson. Andy Davidson's new book is coming out, and that's really something to be excited about. Gosh, what else? These are all books that I've read recently. Rachel Harrison is always a go-to. Like whatever she writes, I will pick up. I thought The Return is like contemporary classic. Really, really feel like that one is gonna stand the test of time, and people are gonna be reading that for a long time. Manhunt was really fun. Gretchen Martin. That one was intense. I mean, you mentioned Haley Piper and Queen of Teeth. Like I read Manhunt, and I was like,
I don't have the guts to read Manhunt. I've seen the Twitter threads. I've seen the no.
It's a doozy. It's a doozy. Yeah. But I mean, like, I feel like having a book that kind of draws a line in the sand and asks you to cross it is, like it's pretty.
Yes.
It's a doozy. I would say it's not for everybody, but these books shouldn't be for everybody. They should be for who they're for.
Right.
So yeah, I think those are the ones that I would totally recommend. I would throw all of those out there.
All right.
Oh, and Good Neighbors by Sarah Langan. That's been kind of like
such a good book. It's such a good book. I loved that book. I was like, this is accurate. Like, honestly, this is just accurate. And she just wrote about her neighbors that she's living next to. This is not made up. This is true life right here.
Yeah, it's true.
All right. Any movie recommendations or
Oh, wow.
podcasts that
Yeah.
you got?
I don't listen to as many podcasts as I should, which is terrible to admit. I've just lost all of my podcast friends. As far as movies go, it's funny. I just got back from the Overlook Film Festival, and I was able to see Watcher. Watcher's pretty good. I just saw the new David Cronenberg film, and I can't say I was necessarily like bowled over by it, but it reminded me of what I love so much about David Cronenberg. So I would say I'm a big David Cronenberg fan and would advocate for his body of work. What else have I seen recently? I'm drawing a blank. This is terrible. I mean, I could just do the mainstays, like since we're talking about supernatural stuff, like I feel like the original Haunting is such an amazing movie. Like I feel like I can watch that anytime, every time, no matter what. But like there's like this whole kind of like body that goes around that, where it's like the Legend of Hell House or Burnt Offerings, or like all these kind of like, I know that the original Haunting was like filmed in the 50s or 60s maybe, but then you get to the 70s and there was like all these kind of this like spate of like Audrey Rose, like books, like there were books first that then get turned into movies, and maybe the movies aren't as good as the books, but I think people tend to remember the movies more than the books, which I think is a heartbreaker. But Burnt Offerings, both the book and the movie. Audrey Rose, I might recommend the movie more than the book. Is that true? Yeah, it's so funny. There's so many kind of like, thinking of the book and the film and kind of, putting them together and imbibing them as a kind of pairing. You can't go wrong with The Haunting of Hill House.
Right. That just makes me think of the Grady Hendrix paperbacks from hell, and how many of those books in the 70s and 80s got turned into B-rated or B movies, and they're great, but I have no desire to read or see any of those. I was just like, he wrote a great summary of them. I'm fine. I'm good.
I mean, there's some diamonds in that rough. I would say, kudos to Grady for having sifted through them all so that you don't have to. But I have such a affinity, like a soft spot for of finding books, either being like, oh my God, I just watched this movie, it's great, and it's based on a book, but the book is out of print, so now I have to go on this like hunt to find the book and read the book, and the book becomes this kind of this like eye-opening experience where it's like, oh my God. And I love doing that. Like I love, Magic by William Goldman, who wrote the novel first, and then it's adapted into this film starring Anthony Hopkins, and I think it's directed by Richard Attenborough, or it's I can't pull it out, but no, I love like the kind of like out of print 70s paperback that was like a hot New York Times bestseller in its day, and then decades later nobody knows about it, but they've seen the movie because it was like on VHS back at the ye old video store.
All right, we're just about out of time. Does anybody have any questions? I'm gonna check
I'll let
real
patrons
quick.
go if they have something to ask first.
I'm looking to see if anybody has asked anything online. Margaret, you got any questions? All right, Carrie, what do you got?
All right, so just stepping slightly aside from horror for a moment and as an author. We've got a young writers club here at the library, and we met last night. And one of the things we talked about was how they have not a terribly difficult time coming up with ideas and getting started, but then they get stuck and they don't finish. And we end up with a lot of first halves of stories. What advice would you give to someone who's trying to become an author and struggles with that?
You know, it's funny how I do think that like there's like that point where you reach an impasse and you're like, oh, you know, you don't know where the story goes from there. And I always find like that's the kind of moment where your story is telling you it wants to go in a new direction. So I always feel like it's fun to throw a wrench in the works or a grenade where you like, what is the most disruptive course of action that you could take for a story that jolts you as the writer? You know, what kind of curveball or turn can you just take so sharply that like you thought the story was going this way, but then you start to lose momentum or you just don't know where to go with it? Well, then that's when the aliens pop in, or that's when, you know, you realize you've been a ghost all along, or like, you know, whatever it is, like it might not be the right choice to make, but it's a choice that kind of pushes you or compels you forward. And I feel like you have to kind of disrupt your idea of what the story is. Like if you're losing momentum, or if you're losing that kind of like the drive forward, the forward motion of the story as the writer of it, then that means you're kind of losing the narrative, and the narrative needs to move. It needs to go in a different direction. And I'm also a fan, just purely kind of on a nuts and bolts level. Like I have an A and I have a B. I know that I'm starting at A and I need to get to B. And I might take the long circuitous route to get to B, but you know, I push through. It's mercenary. It's just like, you know, head down, nose to the grindstone, like write that first ugly draft, get to the end. They all lived happily ever after, or they all died, whatever your ending is, and then revise it. Like the revision process is where you make a lot more discoveries. And I think that there's such a like mental block of like, oh, where I don't know where to go. Like you just have to be like, no, I'm gonna write the crappiest version of this story, but I'm gonna get it down on paper. I'm gonna put a foundation down. And then I'm going to revise and I'm going to churn, like then the story starts to kind of take a shape that's actually more in line to what the story itself wants to be. But you just have to get over that first initial kind of hurdle, which is like, I don't know where I'm going, or I don't know what this is, and I don't know where to end it. And you just like, well, no, just end, like write the worst version of your story, but you know, just get words down on paper, and then take a step back, take a breather, put it down, get some distance, have some time to kind of reflect and kind of heal, and then go back in when you're ready and be like, oh, that's awful, I'm going to change that, or I'm going to throw that out and I'm going to put this in. And then it, like, you sculpt, but you need to put that raw slab of clay onto the spinning wheel first before you can start kind of sculpting the narrative.
I don't remember who it is, but there's one of the authors that I follow on Twitter always refers to it as the trash draft. Like, you spit everything out and you know that 90% of it's going to be trash, but you spit it out anyways so that you can at least get it all on the paper. And I love that idea.
Wholeheartedly agree.
Anything else, Carrie? Not really. I'm looking forward to advising these kids more. We just found out that we potentially have an offer if they can write 1 to 5 page horror stories. There are some people at UW Parkside who will film them, turn them into little movies.
Oh wow, that's amazing!
So exciting!
I know. I got to spread the word to more people, to more teens.
Congratulations!
The next time with club meets, the deadline will have already passed. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll get it out there for you. one last question. So we're having a competition this month. So we're having mini competitions throughout the whole summer for various summer scares themed programs. And this month is our 2-sentence horror stories.
Whoa.
Do you have one? Do you know any? Do you want to share? I'm putting you on the spot. I am. I'm putting you
are.
straight on the spot, but
He looked at the Zoom session, realized he was almost out of time, and just as he was about to come up with an idea, the session ended. Oh no!
Oh, I love it. That's great. Technical difficulties. We have to go. I'm sorry.
The Wi-Fi cut out. Dun dun dun.
Well, you'll have to keep an eye out. I'll share you the links later.
Yeah,
But
please do.
also in July, we're doing a horror podcast showdown. So we're doing like a March Madness. So that's got first episodes of a whole bunch of different horror podcasts. So I'll send you that link
Wow.
once we get there, and maybe you can start listening to something new.
Yeah, give me a listening list.
I will definitely do that. All right. I am gonna thank you yet again for
Thank
joining
you.
us. This was fantastic. I had a lot of fun. I'm sure we'll talk again soon because now I have your
Yeah.
email, so I can just send you information
do.
whenever I want. But this is great. I really am looking forward to having a discussion with our patrons about your book, which was yet again the Remaking. I can't get the camera to do it. The Remaking. There you go. By McLeod Chapman. Thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to reading Ghost Eaters, and we will talk to you again soon.
Thanks so much for having me. Have a good rest of your day, okay?
You too. Bye.
Bye.